He learned to speak English in the streets, not the classroom. That small, stubborn fact would become the seed of a global empire. Bertil Hult grew up in Sweden, a boy who struggled at school and carried a label that makes many children feel small: dyslexia. Teachers told him the lessons he needed to absorb were beyond him. But when a young Bertil left Sweden for a summer job in London, something unexpected happened. He learned to speak a new language by living it. The experience cracked open a simple insight that would define his life. Immersion, experience, and travel could teach people things the classroom could not. Back in Sweden, around the mid-1960s, Bertil acted on that insight. He brought a group of Swedish students to Brighton, England, not to sit at desks, but to live among native speakers and learn by doing. What began as an entrepreneurial experiment in a university town was not just a small travel club. It was the founding idea behind EF Education First. In 1965, in the dormitories of Lund, Hult began organizing language trips, charging students for a chance to live the language in a foreign land. That modest beginning, rooted in a very personal struggle, would quietly scale into one of the most far-reaching private education companies on the planet. The growth trajectory that followed looked almost inevitable when you step back and watch it unfold. Hult's instinct for immersion learning resonated across cultures. EF opened language schools, launched cultural exchange programs, and expanded into new continents. Under his leadership, the company multiplied its offerings: academic programs, online language platforms, international high school exchanges, and tours, building a vertically integrated education group that married language learning with travel, homestays, and real-world practice. What began as helping a handful of Swedish teens soon became a global infrastructure for language and cultural exchange. If you want to understand how someone becomes a billionaire in the education world, the recipe is rare but visible. A big, repeatable idea, relentless global scaling, and holding on to ownership. Bertil Hult kept EF private and family-controlled, which meant decades of reinvestment, long-term thinking, and the capacity to build programs without the pressure of quarterly markets. Over the years, EF grew into tens of thousands of employees and schools in scores of countries, connecting classrooms, campuses, and digital products into a single, exportable business model. That scale, the mix of global reach and a single-minded product proposition, is what turned Hult's personal revelation into extraordinary wealth. But the numbers alone miss the human engine behind the story. Bertil Hult's leadership blended the impatience of an entrepreneur with a teacher's curiosity. He loved structures that moved people: boats, buses, and classrooms abroad. He favored immersion because it forced learners into the discomfort of real speech, embarrassment, trial and error, and the need to improvise. This was learning as living, and it was not only efficient, it was humanizing. Students came back different, not merely because they'd learned grammar, but because they'd been required to navigate conversations, meals, and friendships in a new tongue. That transformational promise became EF's slogan and sales pitch: education that changes your life. Hult's life also shows the odd geometry of risk. He was, by some measures, a college dropout who built and bought institutions that later conferred degrees and prestige. He left school early, worked odd jobs, then returned to his studies for a while, and then left again when the business required it. He was not shaped by a single tidy career plan. Instead, his life was a series of experiments and recoveries. This nonlinear path gave him both empathy for students who don't fit the traditional mold and the appetite to invent around that difference. He did not see dyslexia as a handicap so much as a clue, a way to design learning environments better suited to learners like himself. There are small stories that reveal larger truths. One often repeated anecdote: after that job in London, Hult realized that formal classroom instruction hadn't taught him what living in a language did in months. He started to recruit friends, organize stays, and build itineraries where learning was incidental to living abroad. The language arrived through necessity, not worksheets. That experiential angle caught on because it promised results faster and with more dignity than the repeated failure many struggling students felt in formal classes. When Hult sold the idea, he sold a new kind of confidence. You could learn by living, and maybe you'd find a part of yourself along the way. EF's expansion wasn't only pedagogical, it was logistical genius. The company built a global sales and operations machine that could place students in homestays, schedule classes, arrange travel, recruit teachers, and manage visa paperwork. In other words, EF solved the messy problems that keep people from studying abroad. That operational capability became a competitive moat. Competitors could offer lessons, but few could manage a multinational delivery chain that made international learning turnkey. That operational muscle let EF expand into new markets rapidly, from Europe to Asia to the Americas. Bertil's appetite for growth also showed in his investments in reputation and academic partnerships. In the early 2000s, he purchased and transformed existing institutions into something new. The Arthur D. Little School of Management was reorganized and rebranded into Hult International Business School. The purchase was not merely philanthropic name branding. It was a statement about influence. Hult wanted to shape how international business was taught, and by putting his name on the institution, he created a public bridge between his company's worldview and the next generation of global executives. Hult International Business School spread across cities like Boston, London, and Dubai, and became both a pipeline and a showcase for EF's internationalism. Connected to the school was another of the Hult family's signatures, the Hult Prize. Conceived as a global contest for student social entrepreneurship, the Hult Prize offered a sizable seed grant for ideas that tackled pressing social problems. The prize married Hult's belief in education's transformative power with a practical, startup-oriented approach. Fund teams, accelerate ideas, and create enterprises that might actually change lives. By funding and sponsoring that prize, the Hult family proactively linked philanthropic efforts to enterprise, amplifying the idea that education should result in real-world solutions. Not all of Bertil Hult's story is about classrooms and prizes. He also cultivated passions that informed his leadership. He is a keen sailor, and the sea was more than a hobby. It was another arena for problem-solving under pressure. His boat competed in high-profile races, and sailing's mixture of strategy, endurance, and team coordination carried over into corporate culture. That love of the ocean also helped craft an image. Hult wasn't just an executive in a suit. He was someone who tested himself in extreme conditions and returned to the office with stories about seamanship, resilience, and leadership. Perhaps because EF remained private, the Hult family retained control and continuity. Bertil gradually handed operational reins to his children and trusted lieutenants, moving from CEO to chairman and eventually to semi-retirement. Family members like Philip and Edward Hult became part of the leadership mosaic, taking on roles that linked EF's founding mission with modern management. Succession in family-run companies can be messy, but Hult managed to preserve institutional memory while also allowing the company to adapt to the digital age, adding online learning platforms and modern marketing while keeping the company's core promise intact. The story of EF's digital pivot is instructive. Language learning moved online and blended virtual instruction with in-person immersion. EF's experiments with online classrooms and digital tools allowed it to reach new audiences who couldn't travel but still wanted immersive experiences. The company's capacity to combine physical exchange programs with digital access speaks to a broader truth of Hult's career. He always sought to remove barriers to learning. Whether through a plane ticket, a homestay, or a tablet screen, EF's mission remained the same: connect people so they can learn from one another. Philanthropy in the Hult orbit often circled back to dyslexia and education equity. The Bertil Hult Prize, awards to schools, and support for organizations tackling drug abuse and youth issues signaled a consistent pattern. Invest in institutions and programs that give people real tools to improve their lives. For someone who had once been told he couldn't learn like others, these investments were personal. They weren't just checks on a ledger. They were practical attempts to change schooling for kids who might, like him, not thrive under conventional approaches. Of course, biographies must grapple with complexity. A global company that operates across jurisdictions must wrestle with regulations, tax laws, and scrutiny that come with international scale. EF and the Hult family's business operations have sometimes drawn public attention. and the life of a private education giant involves trade-offs between expansion, local partnerships, and maintaining consistent educational quality. But Hult's story is not a neat fairy tale of uninterrupted triumph. It's a long career of adaptive strategy, occasional controversy, and persistent belief in a mission that exceeded profit alone. What makes Bertil Hult singular is the gap between a modest beginning and the scope of his vision. A young man who left school without a diploma did more than start a company. He exported an idea about learning itself. The model he championed treated language as an instrument of empathy. When you can speak someone else's language, you also learn how they see the world. That philosophy shaped EF's marketing, its schools, and the thousands of staff who sent students into foreign living rooms and classrooms. The ripple effect: students, exchange alumni, and Hult-backed institutions multiplied that original insight many times over. People who work for EF often describe an unusual intensity, an almost missionary zeal for the idea that international exposure remakes people. For Hult, that intensity was both personal and professional. He had known the embarrassment of failure in a classroom and the liberation of learning by living. He built a company that institutionalized that liberation, standardizing the messy, human experience of learning into offerings that parents would buy and students would trust. It's an odd alchemy, the intimacy of a homestay made scalable by corporate logistics and backed by a long-term family ownership. As he matured, Bertil Hult assembled a portfolio that fused business and civic ventures, schools, prizes, foundations, and international partnerships. The Hult name sits on a business school that now spans continents. The Hult Prize funds student teams tackling global problems. EF's classroom networks deliver language study and cultural immersion at scale. These are not unrelated artifacts. They are a single worldview imagined into multiple institutions. Education as a platform for global opportunity. When people ask how much Hult's empire is worth, estimates have varied, but major business outlets have consistently placed him among the wealthiest entrepreneurs in education. Part of that wealth is paper, the value of a private company with decades of cash flow and global assets, and part of it is influence, a person who can buy and reshape a business school, fund global competitions, and maintain a private company that touches hundreds of thousands of lives. For students and investors alike, Hult's success is not just financial. It's a demonstration that a single idea, executed persistently and globally, can change industries. A final image may be the best way to summarize the man. Picture a small boat slicing through a gray sea, a team working in shifts, sails trimmed, eyes on a horizon that keeps moving. That image fits Hult because his life never stopped being about movement, moving language, people, and ideas across borders. He built bridges so that someone from a small Swedish town could stand in Brighton, in Tokyo, or in Boston and find a way to belong and to learn. For Bertil Hult, education was not about credentials alone. It was about the lived moment when language unrolls into friendship, job opportunity, and a new sense of possibility. If there is a lesson in Hult's career, it is plain but powerful. Design systems that let people learn by doing and then make them global. The rest, the schools, the prizes, the yachts, and the headlines, rose from that stubborn conviction that language and travel change people in ways test scores cannot measure. Bertil Hult's life is an argument for experiential education, for scale with purpose, and for the idea that a problem you once carried as a child can become the scaffold of a life's work. In the end, biographies are always partial. They compress decades into narrative beats and tidy complexity into meaning. Yet Hult's story resists simple reduction because it's really a story about millions of small transformations. A student learning to order coffee in another language, a family hosting a foreign teenager for a month, a team winning a prize and starting a company that employs dozens. Those small transformations are the true ledger of Hult's life. Not only the balance sheets and the headlines, but the human moments of being understood, of finally saying the sentence you practiced, and of discovering that the world is, after all, navigable. Today, Bertil Hult is semi-retired, a presence more symbolic than operational, but the institutions he built continue to hum with activity. Schools enrolling students, alumni networks connecting across continents, and programs that keep trying to translate a personal insight into public good. That is a rare kind of legacy, an idea turned durable enough to survive changes in management, technology, and global travel. For a boy who once felt excluded by the classroom, the world he created offers countless entry points for learners who need a different path. So when you see a classroom of exchange students or a backpacker mastering a language, you're witnessing a line that stretches back to one practical experiment in Lund. A man who discovered that the fastest way to teach hearts and minds was to move them. Bertil Hult's life is a reminder that the most transformative businesses often begin with the simplest empathy. The recognition that if something worked for you, it might be made to work for others, right? On a scale that matters.